proper, and incidental to the grant of the general power. The general power here granted is the power to enact laws and all other necessary powers, all incidental powers, to make effective the exercise of the power to legislate. All that power should be granted to Congress. And this view of Cooley, of Black, have been adopted by our Supreme Court. Well, I can furnish the Senate with the cases where this doctrine has been adopted by the High Court. So we come to the second view of Father Aquino on the necessity of complying with the constitutional provision on requiring separate readings of a bill on different dates. A few days ago, this area of concern was raised in the House itself. I think this was raised by, among others, Congressman Lagman and Congressman Rufus Rodriguez. And yesterday, listening to the deliberations in the House, it would seem that the House has taken a remedial action to comply with this provision. The House has, I understand, recalled the bill, and the bill is now undergoing debates in the House. So perhaps that issue should no longer be discussed. Even submitting the thesis that indeed that should have been followed by the House of Representatives. The House should have followed that because that is a provision that is mandatory in character. It is not merely directory in nature, in the sense that the House can or has the option not to follow it. All provisions of the Constitution in general are considered as mandatory in nature. But as I said, that is an issue that seems to be moot now, considering that remedial action has been taken by the House. But having said that, the legal situation of the House bill on provisional authority being granted to ABS is still very murky, very confused. The bill that is being discussed is what we call a work in progress. We do not know what will be the final shape of the bill, whether the House will come out with a bill granting provisional authority, or whether the House will grant the renewal of the law granting a franchise to ABS-CBN. These are important facts to consider. Why? Because of Article 6, Section 24 of the Constitution. I draw your attention to this provision. And it states, among others, that all private bills shall originate exclusively in the House of Representatives, but the Senate may propose or concur with amendments. You look closely at this provision. It has two important parts. The first part provides that private bills, among others, shall originate exclusively in the House of Representatives. And the second part provides that the Senate may propose or concur with amendments. So the first part would demand a proper understanding of the word originate. And the second part would call for a proper understanding of the extent of the powers of the Senate to propose or concur with amendments on bills that exclusively originate from the House of Representatives. I think there has been a lot of discussion on the meaning of the word originate, a lot of discussion also with respect to the parameters of power of the Senate to propose or concur with amendments on bills originating from the House. And reference has been made to the case of Tolentino versus Secretary of Finance. Indeed, that was a decision promulgated by the Supreme Court, if I remember, way back in 1996. And 1995 or 1996. Anyway, I was a member of the court at that time when that decision was promulgated. Let me say that that case indeed discuss the meaning of the word originate. And according to the ponente of the decision, Mr. Associate is Vicente Mendoza, originate means initiate. So his thinking is that if there is already a move on the part of any member of the House to initiate a bill, a local bill or a private bill, then the powers of the Senate to propose or to concur with amendments already kicks in. However, that viewpoint of Mr. Justice Mendoza garnered only the full concurrence of about 3 or 4 members of the Supreme Court. In other words, we cannot call it a doctrine because it did not gather the majority vote of the 15 members of the court. In fact, several separate opinions were written by, among others, the Chief Justice at that time, Chief Justice Narbasa, Justice Cruz, Justice Regalado, Justice Padilla, Justice Feliciano, and others, where they did not agree with the interpretation made by Mr. Justice Mendoza that the word originate merely means initiate. Let me read, for instance, the opinion, the separate opinion of Chief Justice Narbasa on the meaning of originate. And this is what he said. Origination should have no reference to the time of conception, but to the affirmative act which effectively puts the bicameral legislative procedure in motion. That is the transmission by one chamber to the other of a bill for its adoption. And I think this was the point being raised by some members of the Senate, particularly Senator Francis Tolentino. My point is that the meaning of the word origination is not that clear, even given the interpretation made by Mr. Justice Mendoza in the Tolentino case. In fact, all the members of the court who participated in that decision have long been retired. They are all out. And 9 of them are already dead. So, what is the proper interpretation of the word originate? Does that mean that the Senate should await the transmission of the final draft of the bill passed by the House of Representatives? Is at the point of transmission the time when the powers of the Senate to propose or to concur with amendments start? That is a question that the Senate has to consider. There is that other issue about the extent of the powers of the Senate to concur or propose amendments. Is there a limitation to the power of the Senate to propose or concur with amendments? My submission is that there is no limitation on the power of the Senate to concur or to propose amendments. The power to enact laws is given to both the House and the Senate. And in the matter of making laws, these two houses are co-equal. If you limit the power of the Senate in lawmaking, you will be making this power, which is conjunctively given, and that will, degrade the power of the Senate to participate in lawmaking. There are other issues which have to be tackled with respect to how this Senate Bill 1521 should be crafted. And when we reach that point, Mr. Chairman, I would also express my humble opinions. But for the present, that is all my submission.
Thank you, Chief Justice Puno. And before we recognize Senator Tolentino, let me greet you a belated happy birthday. And you turned 80 years old last Sunday in the midst of COVID. Let me recognize Senator Tolentino.
Mr. Chief Justice, just one clarificatory question. You probably might have skipped the origination, initiation, that would definition that would trigger a Senate action, Mr. Chief Justice. If I may, if you may clarify that again.
Well, personally,
insofar as origination clause is concerned. Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice.
yes, well, personally, and it's a personal opinion, I favor the school of thought that the Senate has to wait for the formal transition of the bill that has been approved by the House. To me, there is a great value for the House to await the transition of the bill coming from the House of Representatives. Obviously, there is a high purpose for the Constitution to make this sequence of acts and events. We all know that on the matter of bills of local application, private bills, the primary consideration should be given to the deliberations in the House of Representatives. And the reason for that is that the representatives from the House represent a distinct viewpoint, the viewpoint that comes from the districts that they are representing. This value would be lost if the Senate does not await the final form of the bill that would be enacted by the House of Representatives. Well, of course, some senators say that the practice is different. The Senate can take some preliminary steps, delay the submission of of the committee report. But in the interest of time, these preliminary steps can be taken. I'm not passing judgment on the constitutionality of this practice. But my personal opinion is that it is best to await the transmission of the final bill that would be coming from the House of Representatives.
Mr. Chairman, just a follow-up question. Just to be more specific, Mr. Chief Justice, when you say, when you opine that the Senate should wait for the final transmittal of the House version, you're also referring, or you don't make any distinction between the plenary action and the committee action. Is that correct, Mr. Chief Justice?
Yes, it is best, of course, to hear the final sense of the House of Representatives. In other words, the Senate should await for that bill already in its final form. That bill which already contains and expresses the wisdom of the members of the House. I think that is the more appropriate step to take.
Mr. Chairman, can I react to Chief Justice Puno?
Senator Enrile, before I recognize you, let me acknowledge the presence of Senator Pacquiao, who's virtually with us. Before I recognize Senator Enrile, let me recognize Senator Drilon, who's been raising his hands for a while. Senator Drilon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for the record, our practice is that once the House approves on final reading, third and final reading, their version of bills that must originate from the House, that bill, once it reaches the Senate, is referred to the committee, and the committee conducts a hearing on that bill. Now, so the proceedings that we are doing now is can be equated to a meeting because it is not technically a hearing that the House that is on the subject of a House bill. But let me repeat, when the House version comes to the Senate, it is set for hearing. The committee hears that House bill. The report is submitted to plenary. What is submitted for consideration is the House bill, not the Senate bill. And therefore, it complies with the standard which the Chief Justice Puno has mentioned, to which I fully agree. Except that as a matter of practice, we do it. We are conscious. The House bill that is referred to the committee for deliberation, and that House bill is the one reported out. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, just a clarification. What we are doing this morning, is it a meeting or a hearing, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman?
Well, it should be a hearing because there was a formal notice for hearing that was issued to the members as well as the resource persons, Mr. President.
So for the record, this is not a meeting. This is a hearing, a committee hearing.
Correct, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, I also I heard the chairman announce that there will be a second committee hearing to be conducted next week, and this will be done precisely to await the final version of the House bill. If that is done, I would like to think that whatever question on the application of this origination doctrine would vanish.
Thank you, CJ. Senator Drilon,
Yeah. Regardless of how we denominate the hearing today, whether a meeting, a conference, or a hearing, what is relevant is that we hear the House version when it reaches us. That's all that I'm saying. What is controlling is the fact that we will hear the House version when it reaches us. So all these preliminary meetings, as characterized by Chief Justice Uno, there is nothing illegal or unconstitutional about it, because what the plenary will finally consider is the House bill after the House bill is referred to the Senate. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Senator Enrile is recognized.
I would like to react to the statement of the good Chief Justice Puno. I agree with him that bills, changing the names of a street, a school, or a structure, or a town, a barangay, or anything, should begin in the House of Representatives. Now, if that his opinion is correct in that, will that apply to bills like appropriating money for the national government, raising revenue, changing tariffs, incurring loans, or legislation bearing on national interest? You know, we have to coordinate this with the provision of the Constitution that either House of Congress can conduct hearings in aid of legislation. When you conduct hearings in aid of legislation, you can ask any question, inquire on any subject, whether there is a bill pending or not, because the purpose of that provision is to educate the legislators about national issues and national problems. If we are going to follow Chief Justice Puno's position, we'll become too rigid in our legislative functions. That is my knowledge of the Constitution, and that is my experience under the 1935 Constitution and all the Constitution that followed after that. I would like his reaction.
Should consider.
Okay. Chief Justice, may we request your reaction, please?
Yes, with due respect to former Senate President Enrile, let us bear in mind that two kinds of laws are within the power of Congress to promulgate. The first kind would refer to what we call as laws of general application. In this kind of laws, the Constitution is clear that both houses can tackle the law not in a sequential basis. Both houses can initiate the law, deliberate on the law without any restriction. But we are talking here of a special kind of a law. Laws of local application and private bills and so on. This is a different kind of a law because of the additional constitutional provision on origination. The provision of the Constitution particularly states that
I just want to,
a
Mr. Chief Justice, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just want to let you know that revenue laws applies to the country in general. Income
Yes,
taxation, VAT, everything. Appropriation law applies to the nation, everything.
yes, but
It simply, the Constitution simply says that it must originate in the House. If your theory is correct, then will the Senate stop working and just wait there without studying the revenue laws and appropriation laws that are coming to it, or the tariff bills, or the loans that the government will be planning to incur? If you are going to restrict the sequence that you are proposing?
my submission is that
To the gentleman, to Chief Justice, and to Senator Lee, for an orderly discussion, let us allow the resource person to finish their conversation, their discussion, so that we can follow also. Senator Ping and I are intently listening, and just with all due respect, for an orderly discussion, let's allow the resource person to finish. Senator CJ, Senator CJ, Chief Justice Puno.
yes, my submission is that in interpreting this origination provision, of course, we should not resort to a literal interpretation that would result in an interpretation that is not appropriate to the spirit of the Constitution. I'm saying that we do not interpret this provision the same way that we interpret the origination of private bills and the origination of appropriation bills and so on and so forth. I'm saying that we should have that kind of space, that kind of elasticity, so that we are able to serve the spirit of the Constitution. That is all what I'm saying. We should not resort to interpretations that would result in absurdity.
Thank you, CJ.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice. With the permission of the chair, thank you,
Yes.
Mr. Chief Justice.
Yes.
My position is that both houses of Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives, can conduct public hearings on any subject of legislation except changing the names of barangays, of streets, and so forth. Those are private bills, or granting citizenship to a particular person. That is a private bill. But in the case of bills originating from the House, like appropriation, revenue bills of whatever nature, tariffs, and domestic and foreign loans, both houses have plenary sessions to conduct hearings in aid of their function to legislate at any time, anywhere, without restriction.
Thank you. Senator Tolentino is recognized.
Yes, Mr. Chair,
Just
just
on another topic.
yes, a quick housekeeping manifestation. This committee is in receipt of a communication coming from the National Telecommunications Commission, Commissioner Gamaliel Cordoba, explaining his absence today given the sensitivity of the issues involved and the pending cases before the Supreme Court. Mr. Chair, do we note and acknowledge the reasons given by Chairman Commissioner Gamaliel Cordoba?
Senator Tolentino, this committee has also received letters from the Office of the Solicitor General as well as the NTC, basically explaining their absence for today's hearing and invoking sub judice as their primary reason. So we recognize and we will put that into the records.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And we're also, Father Aquino is also raising his hands and he is recognized. Father, are you still there? Father, paki-unmute po. Naka-mute po kayo. Naka-mute po.
Ayan na.
Senator, yes. May I just chime into the discussion on this initiation thing? Number one, there is no doubt that the franchise is a private bill, and therefore, by constitutional mandate, it must originate in the lower house. When Tolentino versus Secretary of Finance was decided, the Supreme Court clarified the word originate and said it must be initiated by the lower house. But that will not preclude Senate from modifying it entirely, overhauling it entirely, and it will not matter that it is the Senate version that is eventually passed and not the version of the lower house. So the only requirement is that the bill should originate in the lower house. That there is nothing, however, in the text of the decision nor in the Constitution that precludes Senate from conducting inquiries in aid of legislation, even anticipated legislation. So there are two things here. The power to pass the bill is limited only by the constitutional requirement that Senate must await what is sent it by the lower house insofar as the franchise is concerned. But to conduct hearings like this, to enable the senators to inform themselves, there is nothing in the Constitution really that bars that or even limits it. That is all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And this representation has already intimated that we will conduct another hearing once the House of Representatives transmits the official version that is being discussed on the floor. We anticipate that it will be the second reading will be concluded today, hopefully, and by next Monday it will be transmitted to the Senate. By then, we will consider that official bill, and we will conduct another hearing so that the senators can participate and comment on that bill. Today is really to anticipate some of the discussions being talked about, some of the discussions in the lower house, so that we will be guided accordingly once that bill is transmitted to the Senate. With that, I think because of that pronouncement, we can already move on from the topic of the originating clause of the Constitution and more on the not substantive, but more on the core core issue of the provisional franchise. And we also invited ABS-CBN today. It's represented by the president of the ABS-CBN, Mr. Carlo Catigba. I read the transcript. No? Binasa ko po yung transcript sa House, both last week and yesterday. And ABS was never invited in that discussion in the lower house. So I just want to ask ABS-CBN, what is their opinion, and will they accept this shorter term, this provisional franchise, which is termed at 5 months? Will they accept it? And what is their view on that?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for recognizing ABS-CBN. At this point in time, our primary concern is to try and get back on the air as quickly as possible. And we leave it to Congress jointly to decide what's the best way for us to legally return to the air. But it is critical from a financial standpoint and from an employee welfare standpoint that we return, we go back on air as quickly as possible, Your Honor. If a provisional franchise until October is the quickest way to get us back on air, then we accept that, with the hopes, of course, that we continue to have hearings to grant us the 25-year franchise.
Go ahead, Mr. Katigbak.
Yeah, sorry, I just test this if I can be heard, Mr. Chair.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So I was saying earlier that at this point, the most important priority for ABS-CBN is to return on air as quickly as possible. We need to do this so that we can again start earning revenues so that we can continue paying salaries of our employees. If the provisional franchise valid until October is the quickest way to get us back on air, then we accept that with the hopes that Congress will continue hearings so that eventually we can secure, hopefully, our 25-year franchise.
Mr. Chairman,
Are you,
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Katigbak?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator Enrile.
Well, may I intervene with the
Go ahead.
permission of the chair? Instead of giving a provisional franchise to ABS-CBN, why not amend the National Telecommunication Commission's authorization to grant it the power to extend, so that if the Supreme Court will make a decision, there is no collision between Congress and the Supreme Court. Why not delegate that power to the NTC, the power to give a provisional permit to the agencies under it when their charters or franchises had expired, instead of granting a very short period franchise and then it ends. And if the matter is not resolved with finality, then you will extend again. You will be tinkering with the Constitution as if it were a statute.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator
Thank
Enrile.
you.
To Mr. Katigbak again, so ngayon hindi kayo nag-ooperate, yung mga empleyado ninyo ay sumisweldo pa rin?
Your Honor, when we were taken off the air on May 5th, we made a commitment to our employees, given the difficult economic situation following COVID-19. We made a commitment to them that we would not take away any jobs for 3 months. We continue to lose a substantial amount of money every month, Your Honor, and I'm afraid that if we cannot get back on air soon, by August, we may already have to consider beginning a retrenchment process, Your Honor, Mr. Chair.
So from now till August, you have committed to your employees that they will be receiving salaries and everyone will be maintained as employed.
That's right, Mr. Chair, because we decided that it would be very difficult for any employee that was laid off to find another job in this current situation. And we felt it would be very, very painful to put our employees out on the street without them having an idea as to how they could continue earning a living and continue to feed their families, Your Honor. But unfortunately, we cannot make that commitment open-ended because we are also limited by financial constraints.
From an operation standpoint, if you are given a short-term 5-month franchise, can you immediately operate, or do you will need some amount of time to jumpstart your operation?
With permission from Congress and an authority from the NTC, we can resume our operations immediately, Mr. Chair.
Senator Tolentino.
Mr. Chair, one question addressed to Mr. Katigbak, perhaps just a harbinger of the things to come. We've heard a lot of news emanating from the House that there would be a 10% fee that would accrue to the government in terms of the advertising. So we've been hearing of new things that would probably, and this is very conjectural, I'm not saying that a provisional or a franchise would be granted, but looking at our chair, Senator Gatchalian, we've been trying to wrestle on the new normal for basic education. We've been trying to ask the PTB4 and perhaps IBC 13 to be part of the new mode of delivery for educational services, learning tools. Would ABS-CBN, if ever granted a franchise, be willing to provide the Department of Education in providing modules for far-flung areas in the Philippines, especially with the social distancing requirements right now, with the inability of teachers to provide new learning tools? Would ABS-CBN be willing to help assist the Department of Education in providing basic quality education for our learners and students?
Your Honor, Mr. Chair, soon after the COVID-19 pandemic hit, our management team got together, and one of the initiatives we decided to pursue was to create a team that would focus solely on using our media assets for education and for child development. So our answer is yes, absolutely, we are willing to help the government in creating an educational program under the new normal.
So, Mr. Katigbak, in short, you are amenable to being given a shorter term franchise in order to operate immediately.
Mr. Chair, our end objective is hopefully to secure a 25-year franchise. But yes, if securing a short-term franchise is the fastest way to go back on air, then we have no objection to that, Your Honor, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Zubiri?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, may I just ask Mr. Carlo Katigbak a few questions just to clarify. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask Mr. Carlo, if Mr. Katigbak, if there is a threat of you losing your frequencies due to the non-action, let's say, of Congress, if there's a delay, because I know, Mr. Chairman, coming up with a franchise renewal or even application for franchise, we know is a very difficult process as it is already, is with applying with Congress and the Senate. But even a more difficult process is accessing frequency. And that is why there's free TV frequencies allotted and radio frequencies allotted to these companies who have congressional franchises. However, if they lose the frequency, technically they'll be starting from scratch. Am I correct, Mr. Katigbak?
That's largely correct, Mr. Chair. We have built a national radio and television network, and the transmitters were built around the frequencies that were granted to us. Those transmitters are specific to the particular frequency that we operate in. So yes, if we lose the frequencies that are assigned to us, it will be another substantial investment in equipment and time before we can get back on air, Your Honor, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and it could also mean that if you lose your frequencies, for example, your radio frequency at 630 in AM, I know the AM frequencies are already quite full, including the FM frequencies are already quite full. So if that is taken away from you, the most likelihood of you being able to get another frequency would be very difficult. Is that correct, Mr. Katigbak?
In my opinion, that's correct, Mr. Chair. And that doesn't just apply to radio. The analog broadcast frequencies are also almost all taken up already, Mr. Chair.
So, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Katigbak, there is a dire need to be able to have a franchise immediately so that you may maintain these frequencies from the National Telecommunications Commission. Is that correct, Mr. Katigbak?
I agree with you, Your Honor, Mr. Chair.
Yes. Therefore, there really is a need, Mr. Chairman, to act on the particular petitions of ABS-CBN due to the fact that they will not just lose operations, but they may also lose their frequencies, which I feel is not fair unless their franchise is outright rejected or vetoed, then we should give them a fighting chance to be able to continue their operations, Mr. Chairman. And thus, I am in the opinion that, of course, I would like to give or to grant or to move later on, once the House version is here, to grant a longer period of 25 years, which is the pro forma measure that we actually take up almost all the time. But in the due to the circumstances, if the House passes a shorter franchise, as long as it, for me, in my personal opinion, it does not go lower than a year, Mr. President, for them to be able to vent out their problems with our colleagues in the House of Representatives or answer the issues of the House of Representatives. And I point to the fact, Mr. Chairman, that at least no less than a year, because if you grant at 5 months today, if we look at our calendar, we are at Synergy break on June 4. We start our break. And then we come back on July 27, technically for the State of the Nation address of the President. Technically, you lose a month and a half. And then you come towards the season of the typhoon season, rather. And we will be always hampered by the difficulties on weather at that time. We'll be, of course, focusing on the rescue and relief operations, as well as the budget, which will be tackled during that time. So I think in practical terms, Mr. Chairman, if the House of Representatives, and I'm just being presumptuous at this time because we don't know what the discussions will be this afternoon or tomorrow, but if they do pass a 5-month period, and I will not dwell on the word provisional, because we can call it whatever we want, and as mentioned by our distinguished luminaries, as long as it complies with 3 requisites of the Constitution, which is it has to be Filipino-owned, 60% of it, Filipino-owned and organized. Number 2, it cannot be exclusive. It shall not be exclusive. And the period is no longer than 50 years. As long as we don't go against these requisites of the Constitution on Article 12, Section 11, and we can come up with a shorter law. Case in point, the Bayanihan law that we passed recently only has a 3-month lifespan. But on my personal opinion, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, rather, we should at least grant them a bit longer than the 5 months being required and requested, so that they have time to ventilate issues with the House of Representatives. At the same time, continue their operations, Mr. Chairman. That is my humble opinion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Zubiri. And that's why this measure is really quite urgent because of the limited session time that we have here in the Senate, as well as the urgency to allow ABS-CBN to broadcast and participate in the fight against COVID by giving information to our constituents. Yan po para sa akin ang pinaka-mabisa sa ngayon na malaman po ng taong bayan kung ano yung gagawin nila at anong iiwasan nila. At admittedly, there are some areas, in fact, I read some reports, areas like the mountainous areas of Quezon, some areas in Aurora. ABS-CBN is the only network, or DZMM is the only network that can reach that far because of their technology. And itong bagyong Ambola nga, dahil hindi ho sila nakakuha ng balita, hindi ho sila nakapaghanda ng mas mabilis. So there's really a sense of urgency in tackling this measure. And I was conferring with Senator Lacson earlier. The process being employed here is to give ABS-CBN a provisional franchise or a shorter-term franchise, but the original 25-year franchise will still be discussed, and the substantive issues there will still be debated and will still be discussed at the committee in the House of Representatives. So para pong mangyayari, para lang maka-operate na ho ang ABS as soon as possible, bibigyan muna ng maiksing prangkisa, pero itutuloy pa rin po yung pagrinig ng original na prangkisa. And with that, I'd like to ask our members if they have any more questions to propound. To Senator Bato.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. May I ask this question to Senator Enrile, sir? Granting that this provisional franchise of 5 months be made into law, then subsequently, the 25-year franchise will also be made into law. Ang gagawin ba natin is ibabawas itong 5 months from the 25 years na ibibigay sa kanila? Yun lang, sir, yun. Kung ibabawas ba ito, kung ma-approve itong 5 months, ibabawas ba ito sa 25 years na ibibigay sa kanila subsequently?
Magiging mahigit na 25 years. Or pag dinagdagan mo pa, hindi pwedeng 50 years lang. Hindi, ang problema dito, hindi ko alam kung yung 50 years na yun is the end of any grantee's right to engage in the business. Pero palagay ko naman, hindi. 50 years plus 50 years plus 50 years ad infinitum. Hindi ko alam. Only the Supreme Court can answer that question. But what I'm saying is, baka magiging parang joke na itong nangyayari sa ating saligang batas. Kung ginagawa ninyo yung Kongreso na parang administrative agency with quasi-legislative function or quasi-judicial function. Kaya sinasabi ko, mas mabuti siguro i-amend the law creating the NTC and delegate the power to grant a provisional permit or whatever it is to the expiring franchises so that Congress can perform its function to grant the normal periods for the franchises so that hindi magkakagulo na ganito.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chairman.
Related to what Senator De La Rosa asked, it has come to my attention that indeed the frequencies being held by networks, both radio and television, there is a certain limit with Are we aware of is that a provision of law that you're supposed to surrender the same frequency after 50 years of continuous use? Is our resource persons aware of this?
That question is directed to ABS. Mr. Katigbak. Mr. Katigbak, can you reply to the query?
Frequency after a certain number of years of use. Is that correct, Mr. Chair?
Mr. Katigbak, it's repeated from the start. Hindi ho namin kayo marinig. Nakiulat po from the beginning.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. The line is not so clear.
I think galing din sa floor yung problema ng ng audio.
Yeah. Test. Mr. Chair, it's clear now.
Your
Mr. Chairman, dyan sa floor, hindi marinig yung pagpalaboy yung audio nyo dyan sa floor.
There is some kind of happening on the floor. Narinig natin. One of the
Let me recognize Senator Drilon first and then go back to Mr. Katigbak. Senator Drilon, you're recognized.
Mr. Chair, can we be heard now? Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Katigbak.
Yes. We couldn't hear the question of the Senate President. So is it okay if we request the Senate President to repeat his question, please, Mr. Chair?
all right. I don't know how long you've held the frequencies, no, and I understand that there is a certain limit to the number of years a frequency should be held by any network or radio station. If that is correct and that is true, is it correct to say that you are supposed to surrender the same frequency after 50 years of continuous use? Is that a rule of the NTC or a law?
Mr. Chair, Your Honor, we are not aware of any such rule in the NTC or any such law in existence.
Thank you. Senator Drilon is recognized. Senator Frank.
Yes, just 2 points in response to the query of my colleague, Senator De La Rosa. Assuming that the that the franchise is a new franchise is only for 5 months. When we come again in October, presumably to act again on a regular 25-year franchise, the 5 months can be added to the 25 years. It can be deducted. That is all up to us because our powers are plenary and we are only limited by the 50-year limitation on the Constitution. We can do anything, include whether or not we include or exclude the 5 months that we are now considering. Second point, with all due respect, I cannot concur with the view of former Senate President, Senator Greeley, to delegate the power to issue franchises to the National Telecommunications Commission. We are aware that in our statute books are examples of when Congress delegating the power to issue franchises to administrative bodies. That is a matter of policy on the part of Congress, and insofar as this is concerned, we take the position that that it is not consistent with public policy to delegate this power to an administrative agency. It involves a constitutional exercise of a constitutional right, the freedom of speech. I would feel very uncomfortable to delegate this to the NTC, especially given our recent experience with the way NTC reneged on its promises to Congress to issue a provisional authority consistent with the practice in the past. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Drilon. Senator Pacquiao.
Mr. Chairman, may I react to
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the 5 months provisional authority to air given to ABS-CBN, I think is not enough kasi I don't get the logic giving a provisional franchise to ABS-CBN within 5 months while the application is pending to lower house in Congress. So hindi ko makita yung logic doon unless matapos yung deliberation ng renewal ng franchise within 5 months until October, then it's reasonable to give them a provisional authority to air and within 5 months. Sa akin lang, magiging doble yung trabaho natin. Magiging doble yung trabaho natin if the process in lower house for a renewal is not yet done until October 31. Hindi matatapos. Mag-renew ulit tayo, mag-approve ulit tayo ng provisional authority to air dahil hindi pa natapos yung so magiging doble yung trabaho natin na unless na kung pwede naman natin bigyan sila hanggang sa matapos itong Congress na ito, itong the whole 18 Congress, hanggang matapos yung unless the Congress will turn down the renewal of the franchise. And that's the time we are going to tell the ABS, close na kayo, hindi na kayo pwede mag-air. Pero hanggat dinideliberate sa lower house, dinidinig yung renewal ng franchise, then bakit natin limitahan yung tayo rin nagpapahirap sa trabaho natin eh. Magpapahirap sa trabaho natin na what if hindi matapos ng October na hindi pa natapos yung deliberation sa lower house, then magre-renew ulit tayo, another work na naman. So for me, I think Mr. Chairman, my opinion is 5 months is not enough unless we will finish it until October 31. The Congress will finish it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Pacquiao. And I'd like to have one last question with CJ Puno. So CJ, in other words, just to reiterate, a 5-month franchise is not unconstitutional, and it can be done through plenary.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the length of the provisional franchise is left to the discretion of Congress. So that's perfectly allowed by the Constitution. And the exercise of that power delves on the wisdom of Congress. And we know the jurisprudence that the exercise of wisdom by Congress cannot be questioned. It's a political question.
Should
But,
we
yes, Mr. Chairman.
should we even call it a provisional franchise or just plain franchise in the body of the law?
Yeah, precisely, Mr. Chairman, if you will allow me to make quick comments on the form, the substance of Senate Bill number 1521. Well, I take it that this is provisional in character. And as Senator Lacson said, this does not settle the constitutional issues that may be raised when Congress tackles the task of deciding whether to renew or not to renew the franchise of ABS-CBN. In other words, this is just an interim measure, a provisional authority whose purpose, whose objective is to preserve the status quo. Now, proceeding from that premise, I'm reading this Senate Bill number 1521. I find it quite strange, Mr. Chairman, that this bill purports to amend Section 1 of Republic Act number 7966. This is quite strange to me because we are amending a section of Republic Act 7966, which is already a dead law. 7966 is passé. It's no longer in existence. So I feel it quite inappropriate to amend a provision of a dead law. Perhaps this Senate bill should stand as a bill, as a law in itself. And I note that the title of the bill does not state that it's amending Section 1 of Republic Act 7966. Perhaps that should be expressed in the title if that is really the decision of the Senate. Then number two, Mr. Chairman, as worded, the provisional franchise given is to construct. To me, this does not merely preserve the status quo. Perhaps it should be quite clear in the bill that this is just a provisional order to maintain the status quo, to maintain the frequency given to ABS-CBN. But to include in this provisional authority the power to construct is to be not in accord with the purpose just to maintain the status quo. And then there is a section here, separability clause. There is no need for a separability clause. There is just essentially one provision in Senate Bill number 1521. So maybe we can take away this separability clause. That is all, Mr. Sec. Oh, before let me give us some quick response to the observations of the Senate, former Senate President Enrile, and the reaction of Senator Drilon. There is the proposal that Congress should just, give the power to issue this provisional authority to the National Telecommunication Commission. Well, I see some legal difficulty there. The provisional authority is part of the lawmaking power of Congress. And we know that the power to make laws cannot be delegated to any other body or an agency like the NTC that belongs to the executive department. And then number two, it's not entirely correct to say that it's be exercising legislative powers. You look at the architecture of our Constitution. Yes, Congress essentially has that power to enact laws. That is the principal power of Congress. But look at the Constitution. Congress is also given the power to exercise non-legislative powers. For instance, when it conducts an investigation in aid of legislation, the conduct of an investigation is not strictly legislative. When Congress subpoenas a witness, he does not appear and he's a judge in contempt of court, that is an exercise of quasi-judicial power. In the same way, you look at the architecture of power of the judicial. The power to interpret laws is the main power of the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court is also granted the exercise of non-judicial powers. For instance, the power to supervise the IBP and others. Those are powers that are non-judicial in character. So it is, you look at the powers of the executive part. The president is given the main power to execute the laws. But again, the executive is also granted the exercise of non-executive power. That is the architecture of power in the Constitution. And I submit that this should be taken consideration of.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, will you allow me to react to Justice Puno and Senator Dillon? Mr. Chairman.
Ang ko lang, sir.
Di ba? Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Gentlemen, I believe this is Senator Zubiri. I believe that the
Mr. Chairman.
The session hall can't read us clearly.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
I think they lost it.
Mr. Chairman.
Naka-off yung audio ni ng floor. Naka-off yung audio nila.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to react to the statement of Justice Puno and Senator Dillon, bearing on my statement to delegate the power to maintain the status quo to NTC.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Senator Enrile.
Now, I did not suggest, and I know that I cannot suggest that legislative power must be delegated to the NTC. What I was saying is to delegate the power to extend the operation of ABS and CBN in order to maintain the status quo and so that Congress will have the time to deliberate on the pending bill to extend the franchise or not to extend the franchise. They have misunderstood my suggestion. Please do not put something in my mind that is not there. I am not delegating legislative power. I'm just telling you that amend the powers of NTC so that in a situation like what we have, which is a situation of first impression, they can extend the status quo in order to protect the interest of the business organization and its employees until Congress can finally make a decision.
All right, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Mr. President.
Well taken, and we'll take note of that, sir. Senator Recto, and then Senator Aquino.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to put on record some of my observations. First, nothing prevents the Senate from extending the franchise beyond 5 months or even to adopt the 25-year normal length of a franchise. No? In this situation, we understand the reason why it is in October as far as the House is concerned. No? But assuming they pass that at October, but nothing prevents us in the Senate passing a regular franchise similar to what we've given to other TV stations or broadcasters, meaning to say it is 25 years. Then in the BICAM, there is still a process to follow. For all we know, we would be able to convince our colleagues in the House to once and for all address the issue and extend the franchise by 25 years. Now, it is also possible for political reasons that they convince us na hanggang October lang muna. Okay? So having said that, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to put that on record that these are part of our options to once and hopefully once and for all settle this issue. No? Because even if we extend it for one more year, we will come back to this issue after a year. So maybe that is part of our option to pass a franchise 25 years, take it to the BICAM, then find out from our colleagues whether they are amenable or not. So it's just that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Recto. Father Aquinos, recognized. Father. Father. Father, nakamute po kayo.
My control, yan.
Yan, okay na.
Senator,
Go
in the
ahead.
first place, may I just make clear that all of this trouble we are having is because the control is apparently with the Senate floor. I cannot control my own mic here. Number two, the other thing I'd like to say, Senator, is whether it is a provisional franchise or not, it will still take the form of legislation. And so even if it is for 5 months or 6 months or half a year or a full year, it will have to take the form of legislation. I can see, at first I myself asked that question, why not yet a full franchise? But if there are outstanding issues that must yet be resolved and questions that the Congress or one of its chambers might like to be clarified about before it passes the final franchise, I can see the usefulness of granting a franchise that lasts for only, 5 months or 6 months or half a year. I also wish to register my concurrence with Chief Justice Puno that there is no point in amending the original charter of ABS-CBN. What will happen is that Congress must pass a new law which embodies the so-called provisional franchise. And with that manifestation, Your Honor, I respectfully ask to be excused now as I must attend to some other thing, thanking the Senate for having given me this privilege to address you all.
Thank you, Father. Thank you very much for your participation and your comments. Senator, Senate President?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, thank you to Father Aquino. Just a short rewind to the original question on the issue of frequency. Would like to ask ABS-CBN, perhaps Carlo or Attorney Mayo may be able to answer. It has come to my attention also that the NTC, in their cease and desist order given, they had a clause asking you, or a show cause order on why the frequency should not be recalled. I think you were given 10 days. Have you answered their order already?
Mr. Chair, may I request that Attorney Bautista be recognized?
Yes, Attorney Bautista, you're recognized.
Thank you, Your Honors. The cease and desist order directed us in the dispositive portion, and I quote, ABS-CBN Corporation is also hereby directed to show cause in writing within 10 days from receipt of this order why the above-mentioned frequencies assigned to it should not be recalled for lack of the necessary congressional franchise as required by law. Our 10th day ended last Friday, and we did file our show cause answer and compliance, Your Honors.
Okay, you did.
Yes,
All
Your
right, thank you. That's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
If I may add, Your Honors, please.
Yes, go ahead, Attorney.
Senate President Enrile earlier asked the question, what is the urgency, considering that there are a lot of radio stations available? May I please point out, Your Honors, that the cease and desist order includes both radio and television stations of ABS-CBN. It is not limited to Channel 2. In fact, there are 5 AM stations and 18 FM stations, which are located all over the country, some in extremely remote areas. Moreover, there are 42 TV stations covered, not just Channel 2. Again, these 42 stations are located in Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, some of them in remote mountainous areas and coastal areas. Finally, the order, the CDO, likewise covers 10 digital terrestrial television stations, located as well in Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. So, may I just correct the misimpression that the CDO merely covers TV stations, principally Channel 2. It does not. It covers the frequencies which are listed in the CDO order, and that highlights the urgency of our getting the franchise or getting back on the air for the reasons mentioned by Mr. Katigbak. Thank you, Your Honors.
Thank you, Attorney. Any more questions from the body? Senator Angara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to confirm, maybe with our more experienced colleagues in the Senate, if it was really the practice to allow it seems, because I was furnished information that even in cases where franchises had lapsed, there were franchises, namely the CBCP franchise, Subic Broadcasting, Philippine Telegraph and Telephone Corporation, and Globe Innove Islacom, where they were allowed to operate up to the end of the congressional term or up to the point where the franchises were granted legislatively. So if that is the logic, if that is the existing practice and tradition, then it would make sense to allow ABS-CBN to operate till the end of the 18th Congress. I want to solicit the opinion of our more experienced colleagues who perhaps have dealt with these questions in the past.
Senator Angara, unfortunately, NTC did not participate in today's hearing for the reason of sub judice, and because they are in the midst of hearing a case in the Supreme Court, they excused themselves from attending. That question can be better answered by the NTC. Senator Dillon?
Yes, in response to Senator Angara, our records in the Senate will show that in those instances cited by Senator Angara, while the debate was ongoing on the grant of the franchises, the NTC did not issue a cease and desist order. And therefore, with the non-issuance of the cease and with no action from the NTC, in effect, it was taken as an agreement by the NTC or an order from the NTC that they can continue to broadcast. And in our recent debates, Senator Angara, Senator Poe, as chair of the Committee on Public Services, cited that precedent, at least in Congress, that is the practice. Again, the practice is the NTC did not allow or did not issue any cease and desist order. That is why among the points raised against the cease and desist order issued by the NTC is the unequal protection of the law, uneven application of the law, because they did not issue a similar cease and desist order in at least 5 instances when the franchises of these different telecommunication companies were pending while or the expired while the renewal was pending and being debated in the Senate. And the practice was that it should be remain in effect until the end of the term of the Congress. In fact, Mr. President, we have filed a bill which will, in effect, put into law this practice by amending the administrative code and allowing the telecommunication companies and the franchise holder in general to continue operating while their application for renewal is being debated in Congress, because it is not the fault of the franchise holder that Congress did not act on the application. So that's the substance of the bill that we have filed, so that we can adequately address this issue should it again arise in the future. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, may I respond to the response?
Senator Lacson and then Senator Angara.
In short, Mr. Chairman, what the way I understood Senator Drilon is that it is not up to Congress to extend the franchise that has already expired, but it is up to the executive branch, the NTC in this particular issue, because they are the implementer or the enforcer of the laws that we have passed. So yung precedents na sinight ni Senator Angara, wala po sa kamay ng Kongreso yun. It's due to the non-action, I suppose, non-action of the NTC to confiscate or to not to issue the frequency, sir, or to continue issuing the frequency, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Angara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I cited those precedents precisely because the NTC in the past seemed to respect the power of Congress to grant the franchise. And while Congress was debating whether to extend the franchises, it did not step in. And this seems to be the exception to the rule. That's why, and this was confirmed by Senator Frank Drilon, and I thank him for his answer. And on to another point, Mr. Chair, is I remember at the February 24 or 25 hearing, when it was still Senator Poe chairing the Public Services Committee before relinquishing to Senator Win, and Secretary of Justice Guevara came to us and said there is a gap in the law. Precisely where we are right now is when a franchise expires and while Congress is renewing its franchise, there is a gap in the law. And perhaps I would encourage the committee to tackle the bill of Senator Drilon because mismo na yung Secretary of Justice nang sabi may kakulangan po sa batas. And siguro to avoid situations like this where so many livelihoods and jobs are affected, especially in a period like this, we could not have a repeat of this situation, Mr. Chair. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Angara. And I did my own research over the weekend, and in fact, those TV stations and radio stations that that did not have a franchise or the franchise expired, but they were waiting for their franchise to be renewed by Congress, they were never issued a provisional authority. In fact, that provisional authority is non-existent. What happened is NTC just let them operate dahil wala akong nagre-reklamo. So in other words, nagpikit mata na lang. But in this case, because of the complaints of the OSG, I think NTC deemed it necessary to issue that cease and desist order. So that is the difference, Senator Ibarra.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Bato is recognized.
Mr. Chair.
And then Senator Nancy. Senator Bato was raising his hands earlier, and then Senator Nancy, and then Senator Pico.
Thank you.
Senator Bato? Senator Bato? Andyan. See he there? Senator Nancy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since napag-usapan ng NTC ngayon, Mr.
Oo. Sayang, mamimim na naman si Senator Nancy.
na company.
Garbled ka?
And then,
We cannot hear you. Senator Nancy, garbled ka? We cannot hear you, Senator
Yun
Nancy.
lang po, Mr. Chair.
Senator Nancy. Wala. Senator Kiko, you recognize?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. May I just be clarified as to the earlier manifestation of the chair that the NTC did not appear in today's hearing, and they are invoking sub judice as basis for the content?
Yes, Senator Kiko. You received a letter precisely invoking that rule, Senator Kiko.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I believe invoking such or using such a reason that there is a pending case to evade or avoid a congressional hearing, I think is unacceptable, Mr. Chairman. Otherwise, given all the cases that are pending before various courts against government agencies or its employees, they will all invoke sub judice in order to avoid attending Senate hearings. And I believe legislative precedents will bear us out that such an invocation has not been recognized or has not been given weight by the Senate in previous hearings in previous Congresses. For the record, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kiko, I understand from the other members that the actual hearing, the hearing itself, is today. And they are mandated to appear on those hearings. But nevertheless, we will take note of your manifestation, and we will monitor closely the proceedings in the Supreme Court. And during the next hearing, if warrants, we will mandate them to appear in the next hearing.
Yes, thank you. And this should be, the message as well to all other government agencies or entities that will be called before the Senate in future hearings. We will not acknowledge or we will not recognize that as a valid ground to refuse attending hearings in the Senate. That there is a pending case. We have not done that before, and we will not be stymied by such invocations now and in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kiko.
Mr. Chair?
Nancy, pakiulit po, Nancy.
Okay na?
Oo, magmask ka raw, sabi ni Senator Ping.
Mag-mask ako para Mr. Chair?
Biro lang yun. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for submission sa NTC, ng listing kung aside from ABS-CBN, meron pa silang inisyahan ng cease and desist order. Yan lang po, Mr. Chair.
They are not here, but we will send them a letter upon your send them a letter containing your request para po ma-submit po sa committee before the next hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Miggs will recognize Senator Risa first, and then Senator Zubiri.
Okay, yes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and salamat din, Majority Leader. Sorry, Video? Oo. Okay, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And salamat kayo po, Majority Leader. So I'll go straight, Mr. Chairman, dun sa finlag ko kaninang mga tanong towards a pro-worker franchise for ABS-CBN. We recently received a letter from the National Alliance of Broadcast Unions, or NABU, signed by its president, Generoso Villanueva Jr., requesting that pro-worker provisions be included in any legislative franchise granted to ABS-CBN. NABU, Mr. Chairman, represents workers in media outlets across the country, including the ABS-CBN Rank and File Employees Union. ABS-CBN has cited the welfare of its employees countless times in its fight for the granting of its franchise. And may note of urgency pa rin because earlier or reportedly, Mr. Carlo Katigbak mentioned that they're considering retrenchment after 3 months if they are unable to return to broadcasting. So itong pressures talaga, Mr. Chairman, both on labor and on business, under these kinds of circumstances. So yung unang tanong ko, Mr. Chairman, paano masisigurado ng ABS-CBN na mas mapapangalagaan nito ang kanyang mga empleyado? Now, given that 3 months is a time horizon na medyo kailangan na nating tignan, if we don't resolve this question of the franchise. So that's my first question, Mr. Chairman.
Is that directed to ABS?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, addressed to ABS. Paano nila pino-foresee mapangalagaan yung kanilang mga empleyado given the current situation and given that 3-month time horizon that they've been probably forced to see and that they have communicated to the public, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Katigbak, you're recognized. Please answer the question.
I think at this point in time, we feel that we're already giving them pay and benefits that are above what the government has mandated and are above what the industries are at or above what the industry is paying. Right now, we're facing two very painful dilemmas. The first one is that the business has suffered significantly when COVID-19 hit. And the second one is that we're now off the air. And so we're hardly generating any revenues. We commit that we will continue doing whatever we can to take care of our employees, to continuously better their compensation as the business improves. It's just very difficult for us to have that discussion today, Your Honor, Mr. Chair. I hope you understand, given the fact that we're facing two very significant business challenges. And as soon as maybe we can get back on air, and as soon as the business normalizes, then I think it might be easier for us to have those discussions at that point in time, Your Honor, Mr. Chair.
Fair enough, Mr. Chairman, and I just like to make it a record also that I've heard from mga kababayan, both from within ABS-CBN and also yung mga regular na taga-panood at taga-pakinig nila, because I failed to mention earlier that in fact, speaking of radio, even DZMM has been forced to shut down. Now, I've heard that there's not enough recognition or appreciation for the fact that, as Mr. Katigbak has mentioned again, the management has continued to sustain their regular employees, and it's fair to appreciate that. But we're in this situation right now, and I've made no secret of the fact that I look forward to voting for the renewal of the franchise once it is the proper time for the Senate to vote on that. So I need to ask additionally questions related to the possibilities of pro-worker franchise na hindi rin naman bago na sa mga resource persons natin sa ABS-CBN, because I also raised this in the previous hearing of the Senate Committee on Public Services. So questions and possible amendments at the proper time related to concerns like paano masisigurado ng ABS-CBN na mas mapapangalagaan pa nito ang kanilang mga empleyado, paano itutuwid ng management ang mga ulat, gaya ng benepisyong eksklusibo lang daw sa ilang regular na empleyado, tungkol sa mga talent na arawan, kung bayaran, kaya lantad sa extended working hours, and mga talent na ilang taon na sa serbisyo pero nananatiling program-based ang Estado. So in relation, Mr. Chairman, to these and similar concerns, I'm thinking ahead, since this is, as the Chairman said at the beginning of the hearing, anticipatory, clarificatory hearing. Would the sponsor be amenable at the proper time to a new provision inserted perhaps prior to Section 11? And I'm referring, Mr. Chair, to Senate Bill number 1521, a new provision inserted prior to Section 11, guaranteeing the rights of ABS-CBN's employees to self-organization, regularization, expression, a living wage, and other such benefits, Mr. Chairman, just for purposes of discussing the possible, anticipating the best case scenario that indeed ABS-CBN's franchise will be renewed. So what would be the possibility, Mr. Chairman, of such a new provision, Mr. Chairman?
Senator Risi, we will take note of your proposal, and as what the Senate President discussed earlier, that the form of the House version is still being debated upon in the lower house. So we will wait for that final bill, and we will try to consider your proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If the Chairman will just allow, I'll put a second and last question of that nature on the record para nga po mapag-usapan natin ulit at the proper time once matanggap na po natin yung House version. And this second and last question, Mr. Chairman, is maaari rin po ba natin sila, meaning ABS-CBN, anticipating the renewal of the franchise, maaari rin po ba natin silang i-require na magkaroon ng kahit isang independent union-appointed director na uupo sa kanilang board of directors at o uupo sa kanilang MANCOM. And lastly, for this after this noon, Mr. Chairman, would the Chairman allow me please to address a related question to former Chief Justice Puno about these questions of mine on a pro-worker franchise for ABS-CBN. Mari po ba, Mr. Chairman?
We will direct Mr. Katigbak to take note of that. He doesn't need to answer that for now. Again, we will have to wait for the final form of the House version to be able to see if we can insert such a suggestion. But
I understand, Mr. Chairman. For the record lang muna today. Opo. Pero may I ask one final question to CJ Puno in relation to these questions?
Yes, go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Justice Puno, magandang tanghali po sa inyo. Yung tanong ko po sa inyo, is there any precedent, or for that matter, is there any restriction on requiring that a franchise observe certain labor standards or in fact allow workers' representatives in management boards or management committees like a MANCOM or yun nga po, management committee? Meron po bang precedent o meron po bang restriction kaugnay sa ganitong mga provisions?
Thank you for the question. Let us just proceed from the premise that a franchise is a mere privilege. There is no absolute right on the part of any person, the part of any institution, to the grant of a franchise. And so, proceeding from that predicate, Congress has all the powers to impose conditions or conditionalities in the law granting a franchise or a provisional order of authority. As long as the conditions do not violate the Constitution, and I do not see how this pro-labor provisions will violate the Constitution. In fact, you look at our Constitution, the spirit of our Constitution is pro-labor. In other words, I do not see any constitutional impediment if you require these conditions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chief Justice Puno, at salamat, Mr. Chair. So lastly, in relation to those questions and the advice of Chief Justice Puno, again, anticipating the future hearings here in the Senate once matanggap na po natin yung House version, I think if at the proper time matanggap man itong mga proposed amendments ko, then compliance with these provisions could then be made part of the network's annual report to Congress. At gaya ng iba pang mga isyung legal laban sa ABS-CBN na nilinaw nila nung nakaraang hearing ng Senate Committee on Public Services, halimbawa yung mga issue na ni-raise sa warrant to petition ng Office of the Solicitor General, ay napapanahon na rin naman na tuwid sagutin ng network yung mga labor issues na ipinupukol sa kanila. At sa usapin ng franchise, after all, kasama nilang nakikipaglaban. Hindi lang tayo mga manonood, kasama nilang nakikipaglaban ang kanilang mga empleyado simula hanggang dulo. So in return, it's equitable to ask ABS-CBN to further advance the rights of its workers and further put their well-being first. And lastly pala, Mr. Chair, again, just for the record, I will ask this question at the proper time when we consider possible amendments, similar to the franchises granted in Channels 7 and 5. I will ask at the proper time if the good sponsor would be amenable to inserting a dispersal of ownership provision requiring the network to provide a portion of the company's stock to its employees as part of their compensation. And if so, this could count against the 30% of the company's stock that has to be offered. Finally, Mr. Chair, I really believe that if a substantial part of the network is owned by its own workers and employees, this will help shield the company from political intrigue and chicanery moving into the future under a renewed franchise. So maraming salamat, Mr. Chair, at sa lahat po na ating mga resource persons.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, of course, we can always consider the proposal of our colleague, Senator Riveros. But maybe, may I call your attention to Article 20 of the Constitution, Section 11, which is on national patrimony. There are conditions set by the Constitution on franchises. It's only limited to 3. Mention that more than 50 years. Franchise is not exclusive in character. Franchise is granted under the conditions that is subject to amendment, alteration, and repeal by Congress when the common good is occupied. So, with that in mind, perhaps the committee can look into the suggestion. But then again, very clear in the Constitution, we alter a franchise as we've done before, then we have to alter all the other franchises once it gets to us. That was what the practice that we have done as Congresses. So pag naglagay tayo ng bagong provision sa isang franchise ng isang network or radio station or whatever, all the other franchises must have it, must have the same. All right. So with that as a reminder for the committee, perhaps may I just go to a one more point to the question on the ABS. There are some observers that have been asking us that we should ask you the the number of employees that you have. I understand in the last hearing already you were able to submit the number of employees. You had regular employees, I think about 5,000. Is that correct, Carlo?
Yes, Mr. President, we have 5,000 employees under ABS-CBN Corporation and 11,000 employees under the ABS group of companies, Your Honor, Mr. Chair.
All right, and then the radio station or DCMM is operating on Sky Cable, right?
DCMM Teleradio is operating on, being distributed by Sky Cable, yes, Your Honor.
Yes, of course, I know. I've been watching. How long is the franchise of Sky Cable?
Your Honor, Sky Cable has two kinds of franchises. They have the local franchise and they have a congressional franchise. I understand their congressional franchise has already expired, but I understand that many other cable companies are able to operate even without requiring a congressional franchise, Your Honor.
If local franchises?
Yes, and provisional authorities.
So you have not filed for a renewal of the Sky Cable?
We have also filed, Your Honor.
1995 was the date it was granted, right?
Yes, Your Honor. We have filed for the renewal as well for Sky Cable.
It's also pending in Congress.
Yes, Your Honor. Yes, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senate President. Any more, Senator Zubiri?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, just for the record, there were several substantial matters taken up by the previous hearing of Senator Grace Poe, when she chaired the Committee on Public Services in February 24, the issue of the ABS-CBN franchise. With the permission of the body, Mr. Chairman, I move that the proceedings of that hearing be made part of the records of this particular hearing as well, Mr. Chairman. And then I have another question after you act on the motion.
Any objection from the body? Hearing none, the motion of Senator Zubiri is carried. Go ahead, Senator Zubiri.
Mr. Chairman, also just to also reiterate the point of Senator Pangilinan, I find it a bit irregular that the NDC did not attend today's hearing. They may invoke the right not to answer on sub judice issues when the issues per se entails the case filed with the Supreme Court. However, Mr. Chair, we still have to ask the regulator if they interpose any objection on the issuance of a new franchise to ABS-CBN. That is pro forma. We ask that to all regulators of all agencies, whether it is the DOE for new applications of, or the ERC for new applicants on the power industry, or which that we're tackling at that particular point in time, where a regulator of that particular industry is involved. So, Mr. Chair, it would be very good to remind them that in the next hearing that they should attend, because we want to ask them, do they interpose any objection on the issuance of a new franchise or a reissuance of the franchise to ABS-CBN? That is an important matter that we have to ask them, or important point rather that we have to ask them. If they do not attend in the next hearing, then they primarily waive their right to make any comment of this particular issue, because they must comment whether they interpose objections or not, Mr. Chairman. Just for the record, that we must reiterate to them that they must appear in the next hearing, and we do not discuss issues that would be sub judice per se on the cases filed, but we need to ask them if they interpose any objection at all on the issuance of a new franchise. That's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Zubiri. I do agree that there are administrative matters, procedural matters that can be answered and should be answered by the NTC. However, they can always invoke the sub judice rule if the matters pertaining to the case itself will be discussed. and we will make sure that in the next hearing, they will be attending to answer administrative and procedural issues, Senator Zubiri. And we also recognize...
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator Zubiri.
It's not me, sir. It's not me, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, this is Senator Revilla.
Yes, we recognize the presence of Senator Revilla. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for including in the agenda for today the two bills I filed on ABS-CBN franchise. In my proposed measure, Mr. Chairman, Senate Bill number 1403, I included in the authority to be given to NTC the following. In case of violations of any of the provisions of this franchise, the NTC shall have the authority to revoke or suspend after due process the permits or licenses issued by NTC pursuant to the franchise. May I get your comment on this? Maybe from DOJ or any legal luminaries that we have here present? Mr. Chair?
Yes, anyone who cares to shed light on the query of Senator Revilla? Senator Revilla, you might want to direct it to a specific resource person.
Okay, Mr. Chair.
Who do you want it to, who do you direct it to?
Maybe kung sino po yung po pwede, anybody, yung sa ating po mga resource persons ngayon, mga legal luminaries po natin. Senator Enrile around, our former Senate President.
CJ Puno?
Or former Chief Justice Puno can answer.
CJ Puno, are you still there? Or former Senator Enrile, are you still there? Wala na ho sila, Senator Revilla.
So maybe we can discuss this in our next
Yeah,
hearing.
we will make sure that we take up your query during the next hearing, and we will take note of that.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Senator Bato still there? Wala na rin po, kumakain na raw. Senator Risa?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick comment po dun sa comment din ni Senate President kanina sa mga tanong po. Indeed, kung mag-succeed po tayo sa Senate na aprubahan ang renewal ng franchise ng ABS-CBN bilang isang pro-worker franchise, then certainly, looking at it from another way, I would look forward na subukan din natin gawing pro-worker ang franchise ng lahat ng mga networks moving forward, Mr. Chairman. So a pro-worker ABS-CBN franchise would be a good precedent for network franchises moving forward to also be even more pro-worker. Salamat, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Risa. We'll take note of your comments, and during the time that we will be deliberating on the Senate, the House version, we will take note of that. Senator Drilon?
Yes.
You have the last comment.
Yes. I was going to say, Mr. President, that as session at 1:30 on the this afternoon, it's just 1 hour away. I would suggest that the other questions that our colleagues may have in mind be reset to the next hearing, which will be called anyway, in order to allow us a little time to prepare for the 1:30 committee of the whole hearing. So, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, I move to suspend the hearing this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Second motion. Thank you, Senator Frank. And with that motion, we suspend the hearing of the four measures that we have discussed earlier. Thank you, gentlemen, for participating. Meeting is suspended. Hearing is suspended.
Okay na. Bakit tinawag ba ako kanina?
Okay.
Good morning to all of you out there. You caught me off guard. We seem to be having some technical difficulties right now. But in any case, welcome to the program Agenda. I'm Cito Beltran. You are watching Agenda via Signal, channels 8 and 250, as well as the Facebook platform of One News PH. We can also be seen on YouTube. So, today is May 19, Tuesday, and truth be told, we are trying our best to stay positive. We are trying our best to stay hopeful, but I think it is now time to have an accounting. It is now time to start assessing what the government is doing. Is the government actually doing a good job fighting the COVID-19 virus in the Philippines? And that is what we hope to achieve today with our guest. But in the meantime, let's go to the headlines before everything else. On the front page of the Philippine Star, it begins with Malacanang is expecting an increase in COVID-19 cases after the failure of many to observe physical distancing in malls and other public places over the weekend. Presidential spokesman Harry Roque said if this continues, the Philippines may suffer the fate of other countries which had spikes in cases after relaxing restrictions. Health Undersecretary Maria Rosario Vergere reiterated that the battle against COVID is not yet over and that reopening establishments does not mean people must flock to malls. As for the province of Cavite, Governor John Vic Remulla, who earlier threatened to go back to ECQ, has ordered malls to be closed down. Reopening establishments, the
Supreme Court is ABS.
Thank you, Your Honors.
Thank you.
Post any of
Tayo sa Senate na aprubahan ang renewal
Or former Senator Enrile, are you still there? Wala na ho sila, Senator Enrile.
So maybe we can discuss this in our next
Yeah, we
hearing.
will make sure that we take up your query during the next hearing, and we will take note of that.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Senator Bato still there? Wala na rin po, kumakain na raw. Senator Risa?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick comment po dun sa comment din ni Senate President kanina sa mga tanong ko. Indeed, kung mag-succeed po tayo sa Senate na aprubahan ang renewal ng franchise ng ABS-CBN bilang isang pro-worker franchise, then certainly, looking at it from another way, I would look forward na subukan din natin gawing pro-worker ang franchise ng lahat ng mga networks moving forward, Mr. Chairman. So a pro-worker ABS-CBN franchise would be a good precedent for network franchises moving forward to also be even more pro-worker. Salamat, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Risa. We'll take note of your comments, and during the time that we will be deliberating on the the House version, we will take note of that. Senator Drilon?
Yes.
You have the last comment.
Yes. I was going to say, Mr. President, that as session at 1:30 on the this afternoon. It's just 1 hour away. I would suggest that the other questions that our colleagues may have in mind be reset to the next hearing, which will be called anyway, in order to allow us a little time to prepare for the 1:30 committee of the whole hearing. So, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, I move to suspend the hearing this afternoon. Thank you very much, sir.
Second motion. Thank you, Senator Frank. And with that motion, we suspend the hearing of the 4 measures that we have discussed earlier. Thank you, gentlemen, for participating. Meeting is suspended. Hearing is suspended.
Okay na. Bakit tinawag ba ako kanina? Okay.
Senator Drilon?
Yes.
You have the last comment.
Yes. I was going to say, Mr. President, that as session at 1:30 on the this afternoon, it's just 1 hour away. I would suggest that the other questions that our colleagues may have in mind be reset to the next hearing, which will be called anyway, in order to allow us a little time to prepare for the 1:30 committee of the whole hearing. So, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, I move to suspend the hearing this afternoon. Thank you very much, sir.
Second motion. Thank you, Senator Frank. And with that motion, we suspend the hearing of the 4 measures that we have discussed earlier. Thank you, gentlemen, for participating. Meeting is suspended. Hearing is suspended.
Okay na. Bakit tinawag ba ako kanina? Okay.
nga yung mga OFWs na wala na ng trabaho, gusto na makauwi, titignan po natin paano mapapabilis yan. We will look into this now. We will go out of our way and actually ask OWA for an inventory, lalong-lalo na kung ilan na yung mga napakatagal nang nag-aantay ng resulta, and really ask yung mga laboratories, kaya nyo ba